Alright guys, in this lesson we're going to be talking all about the Gitignore and how you can set rules to prevent committing certain files to your local and remote Git repositories. So first things first, let's bring up terminal, and what we're going to do is we're going to cd into our desktop and we're going to create a new directory here called project. Just say that we have this brand new project. And now if we go into our project and we create a whole bunch of files to simulate this example project. So let's say we've got something called file1.txt, and we've got a whole bunch of other ones, file2, file3, and we've also got something called secrets file. So we've now got 4 files. And just to illustrate the use cases of when we might want to have a Gitignore file. So say if you have this file that has some, secret passwords or API keys, basically stuff that you don't want to be committed, especially you don't want it to be hosted on an open platform like GitHub. There have been horror stories of people having their Amazon AWS secret keys in their projects and that getting pushed to their remote on GitHub, and within seconds their entire AWS account has been basically used up and wiped clean. So it's really important to think about some of these things and to be aware of what you're putting onto this public platform. So let's say that we've got this secrets file and we've saved it. Another type of file that you might want to add into a Gitignore, or you might want to not upload to GitHub, are files that are to do with your local settings or your user preferences. And there's a whole bunch of these types of utility files that you don't really want another person to have to download and copy into their project folder if they're cloning or if they're forking your project. So a really common example that people tend to add to their Gitignore files are what are called dsstore files. So dsstore files are basically a settings file that saves certain things like how you like your icons to be arranged in a particular project folder. So let's say if we go in here and we just have a look at arrange by none, and then I'm going to move my files around. And let's say that this is just my preference for how I want my files to be shown inside this project folder. Now, the dsstore file is a hidden file, so you won't be able to see it inside your Finder. But of course, we as command line experts know that we can simply do a ls-a to see all of the hidden files that are inside our project folder. And you can see there it is, dsstore. So that's not something that's going to be of any use to anybody else, and we don't want to have to clutter our GitHub remote repository or anybody else's computer with that file. So we're going to add that to our Gitignore as well. So getting onto the point of creating and using a Gitignore file, the first thing you have to do is to make it, right? And to do that, we're just going to create a hidden file, so using the dot in front of the file name, and it's going to be called Gitignore. Now the case and the wording matters a huge deal because we're using Git and it's looking for this specific file. So make sure that when you're using it, it looks exactly like this. So let's create that file, and of course it doesn't appear because it's a hidden file, but we can see it using ls-a. And we can also open it in the terminal by simply saying open.gitignore, and that opens it in your default editor. So for example, text edit. And here is where we add the files that should be ignored when we commit our project to Git. So let me first show you what happens when we don't have anything inside our Gitignore. So I'm just going to save it. It's completely empty. And I'm going to go through the normal process of setting up Git and committing it. So first, if you remember, I have to use git init to initialize an empty Git repository inside my projects directory. And then I'm going to use git add dot to add all the files that are currently inside this directory to the Git staging area. So hit enter, and we can have a look at what's been added by using git status. and you can see that all of these files are added into the staging area, and they're going to be committed if I go ahead and do git commit. So that's not what we want. And instead, I don't want to commit the DS store, and I also don't want to commit my secrets.txt file. So first things first, I'm going to basically undo what I've just done. So I'm going to remove all of these files from my staging area, and then I'm going to add them later on once I've got my Gitignore set up. So basically we're just undoing the last step. So to do that, I'm going to write git remove -- cached, and I'm going to use the R flag for recursive, and I'm going to use a dot to say that everything inside the current directory should be removed from the staging area. So now if I hit enter, you can see that all of these things have been removed from the git staging area. And if I do a git status again, you can see that all of these files are no longer tracked to be committed. So now this is the point where we're going to use that gitignore file, and we're going to add the file names that we want to be ignored when we're adding and committing to Git. So in order to add individual files, you can simply specify the file name on each and every new line. So for example, if we wanted to ignore the DS store, we can simply write DS store. So exactly the same upper and lower casing as the name of the file. And if we wanted to ignore the secrets.txt file, then all we have to do is just to specify it in here on a new line. Now with Gitignore, it has certain rules. So for example, you can use the # to comment. So for example, you can say, pod files, right, to be ignored. Another thing you can do is use wildcards. So if you use the asterisk and you say asterisk.txt, that means that when you commit your project, all of the files that have a text extension will be ignored. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that because I do want to commit the file 1 and file 2 and file 3 to my to Git, but I want it to ignore the DS store and the secrets.txt files. So now we're ready to add our files to our staging area. So let's again use git add dot and use git status to see what's been added. So you can see that the only files that are added are the gitignore, the file 1, 2, 3, but the DS store as well as the secrets.txt are ignored as per the specifications in our gitignore file. So now if I go ahead and commit this as my initial commit, then the only files that are going to be put onto my local commit are going to be these 4, and similarly if I push this to GitHub, it will also be only these 4 files. So now let's create a new Xcode project, and let me show you how you would add a gitignore file for your Xcode projects. So let's just call this test, and I'm going to create it inside my desktop. And now let's just make a few changes. Let's drag on an image view onto our view controller. And now I'm going to save and exit Xcode, and I'm going to clear my terminal and cd into my root, and also I'm going to open this new test folder that we've created just now. So let's cd into desktop/test so that we are right here, and I'm going to create a gitignore file. Then we're going to open our gitignore, and in here I'm going to add some of the files that will be ignored for our Xcode project. Now, if you go to github.com/GitHub, so this is a repository owned by the GitHub team, they have a repository called Gitignore, and it's basically a pre-made collection of useful Gitignore templates. And if you have a search in here, you can find that you've got Swift and you've also got Objective-C. So we're going to go inside the Swift Gitignore file, and you can see that this is a pre-built template for some of the files that you probably won't want to upload to GitHub or any other remote repository. So these have the file extensions for things that are user defaults or user settings, for example, PBX user, and it's basically all pre-made for you. So you can simply just copy all of this and put it into your Gitignore file that you created earlier on. So just straight up paste. And if you remember from earlier on, we said that the lines that start off with a pound sign are the comments, and these ones are extensions that you would ignore. And you might want to add things like DS store into here as well. So you can have something like project wide. So for example, the DS store that we mentioned earlier on. And if you hit save, now if we go into terminal and we're inside our test folder, so we're going to do a git init, git add, git status to see what's going to be committed, and then we're going to say git commit -m initial commit. There we go. And now, once you're ready to commit and add all of this to your remote, then it will ignore all of these common user-related files that are not going to be useful to your collaborators or anybody who wants to contribute on GitHub. So that was just a quick tidbit about using Gitignore. And I know that some of you guys have been asking about, where should you put your API keys? Where should you put your sensitive data? And you have to make sure that when you're uploading your projects with these secret keys and passwords, to make sure that you set up a Gitignore file and to include those things in there. All right, so that's all for this lesson. Now, in the next lesson, I want to talk about git clone and how to clone various repositories to your local system. So all of that and more in the next lesson. So I'll see you there.